In his 1972 book, Ways of Seeing, John Berger spends a few pages talking about the historical and critical reception of one painting by artist Franz Hals. The painting, titled Regions of...
You want to sell your product. Consumers want to see its value.
Hey everybody. So, a movie called The Mind of Jake Paul came out earlier this month on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, it's an 8-part documentary centering on Shane Dawson, professional tender man, trying to figure out through totally anecdotal means if Jake Paul is a sociopath. And you know what? I just want to start this off by saying something that I don't think will surprise you. Whatever else this documentary is about, it's not about sociopaths. At least not in any kind of scientific way. I mean, Shane Dawson seems like a nice enough guy, but he's not an expert in diagnosing sociopaths. And this lady that he got on to be an expert in diagnosing sociopaths, she's not an expert in diagnosing sociopaths. Like, I get that they both have seen Silence of the Lambs, and that she's looked through a copy of the DSM-5, like, I do give them credit for that, but that's obviously not good enough. This whole project is sensational and pseudoscientific, and there was never any chance we'd be able to come out of it saying, oh yeah, diagnostically speaking, Jake Paul's a sociopath. So let's say another kind of obvious thing, because I'm on a roll here. This documentary sure does care a lot about sociopaths. After all, the question of Jake Paul's sociopathy is at the center of this text. It's constantly returned to over the course of the series. And we, as an audience, are expected to assume that this avenue for discourse is a meaningful one. That is, if Jake Paul is a sociopath, it's supposed to mean one set of important things to us, and if he's not, it's supposed to mean another. Okay. Considering these two claims, we're left with a bit of a question here, right? If this documentary is deeply concerned with sociopaths, but if its understanding of what a sociopath is doesn't really find its origin in science or psychology, then what is that word, that idea, doing in this movie? What story does the text perform with its use of sociopaths, and what meanings can we get out of that story? So that's what I'll be talking about today. And maybe this intro was a little on the dry side. I kind of had to shove a bunch of things in there real quick, but sociopathy and the way that it's constructed within the mind of Jake Paul, that's not dry at all. In fact, it's really intricate and weird and just deeply thought-provoking. And if nothing else, that's what I want to convince you of in this video. So, without further ado, Part 1. Building a Sociopath. In the second episode of The Mind of Jake Paul, Shane Dawson sits down with therapist Katie Morton and offers us an explanation of sociopathy that informs this entire work. And for our purposes now, there are only a couple of really important characteristics that they attribute to sociopaths. The first is simple. Sociopaths are evil. Accompanied by horror movie-style edits and footage of Jake Paul acting like a dick, Katie Morton describes this group of people as fundamentally malignant. They lack all empathy, are predisposed toward violence, are incapable of experiencing positive emotions toward themselves or others, and they have no desires besides the lust for power and money.
It's kind of like a robotic state of living, right? So
Yeah, they're kind of like a robot.
At one point, Shane asks if sociopaths have a heart, and Katie responds, no, I don't think they do.
Do sociopaths have a heart?
I don't believe so.
Sociopaths are like evil, like really evil. And when we have this first characteristic, the second seems like a natural extension. Sociopaths are the other. As Katie describes this group of people, she uses words like creepy and gross.
It's really gross. And it's just creepy.
Says they give us the heebie-jeebies and are just plain out unsettling to be around. And just look at Dawson's response to hearing about this diagnosis. He's constantly shuddering and talking about feeling ill. The point is clear. Sociopaths are people who we, Shane Dawson and the audience, are not. Who we could never be, and who present some kind of threat to us, to the way we live our lives and understand things. The sociopath is, in essence, a monster. Somebody who comes to represent the things we fear and the things we hope we are not. And the thing is, on first blush, that doesn't seem like such a novel or groundbreaking idea, does it? I mean, as a society, we've been talking about monsters for a long time. Dracula and Frankenstein and zombies. And within this film, a sociopath is just another member of that group. A little more sciencey looking, maybe. I mean, a therapist comes on to legitimize the existence of these monsters. But still, that's what they are. It's nothing new. But now, let me introduce you to our monster. Or rather, the person whose monster status we have to figure out. It's Jake Paul. It makes bad music, produces boring content, stood on a journalist's van one time. Jake Paul. That's weird, right? That's new. I mean, for one thing, just saying all this out loud, it feels like there's something very wrong here. Jake Paul is the one who might be evil, who might be the other. What has he ever done that could possibly earn him such a title? Act like the chief of the Dude Bros? Play some admittedly hardcore pranks? I'm just not seeing it. But more important for us, the use of monsters within fiction generally serves to embody some broad social anxiety, and to explain to us, metaphorically, why bad things happen in the world. Dracula is a symbol of sexual promiscuity and pathogen. Frankenstein represents science run amok and our concerns about agency. And considering that, it only makes sense to ask, what anxiety is it that Jake Paul could come to embody? What scary thing could framing him as a monster help us to explain? Well, let's get started. Part 2. Understanding a monster. So, given the specific properties of sociopaths within this film, I think the main benefit of positioning Jake Paul as a possible sociopath is that it can provide us some easy, kind of comforting answers to some very big, unnerving questions. By my estimation, there are really 2 of these questions, and in this section of the video, I'll go through both of them in some depth. Here's the first, and I think more obvious question. Why does it seem like our society so often vastly rewards people for giving us nothing of substance? Like, we live in a society that's structured around big, great ideas like individuality and freedom. And because our society has such lofty intentions, we want to think that it will produce good things, that the people doing the best work will go the most rewarded. But then we have Jake Paul, and his work isn't good. I mean, all he does is present a fake life, mix it up with incessant advertising for his brand that pretends to be real content, and then pawns that off to 8-year-olds who will get their parents to buy his stuff for them. I hope it's not controversial to say, that's not a noble pursuit, right? It's at best vacant and irritating, and at worst manipulative of little baby boys. But it works. Jake Paul is super famous, very successful, worth a lot of money. And how, as a culture, are we supposed to reconcile that fact with the idea that our society is, by design, a meritocracy? Well, the film presents one possible answer. What if Jake Paul is a monster? We can start to see this answer coming through the text when we look at just how important wealth and our observation of wealth is to this series. There are 3 mansions that we visit over the course of this documentary. Nick Crompton's, Alyssa Violet's, and, of course, Jake Paul's. And in each of these cases, Shane spends a huge amount of time just processing the size and decadence of these homes.
So I was asking to go pee, like, oh, where's the bathroom? And she informed me that there's 3. It's crazy. This is like the other place we were at for Nick, but like on crack. Wow. Okay. Our house.
Through these observations, Dawson reproduces the sense that what we are experiencing here is the other. Who's financing your ownership of these massive structures?
We don't even like pay for this. Like, it's like our company.
Wait, pays for this house.
That's your.
Oh, it's a bunch of shady, nameless investors? What is this Team 10 thing, and how is it raking in so much money?
Yeah, it's confusing. Like I don't even know what it is.
Oh, you can't really give me an answer to that? Unlike the humble multimillionaire Shane Dawson, everything about Jake Paul's financial empire is presented as cryptic, abnormal, and strangely ominous. And it's through this symbolic language that Shane Dawson connects his understanding of the sociopath to the material conditions of the undeserving rich. That is to say, both Jake Paul and the massive house that he's somehow gotten for himself might represent a monster, might be an evil force that's gumming up the works and producing bad results. And if that is the case, it's not the system itself that's producing this flaw in our meritocracy, it's Jake Paul and people like Jake Paul. They are malformed, heartless creatures who don't care about doing good work, but who are ceaselessly dedicated to gaining power. And because of that, they are able to exploit the system and gain tremendous wealth. And while the existence of these people might be scary, at least we can know what we're looking for. At least we can deal with it and allow our society to go back to its normal, good functioning. But, okay. As much as this documentary does use Jake Paul's possible sociopathy to explain this social problem, there's another, more abstract, more sticky problem that it comes in to address. And here it is. What if watching media doesn't actually tell us anything about the people who make it? Like, we have this guy, right? Shane Dawson. And his entire body of work centers around creating the feeling of authenticity and connection with his audience. I haven't seen much of Dawson's work, but just in this documentary, he projects the image of somebody who wears his emotions on his sleeve, who's sincere and friendly, who's willing to talk about his issues. That's a large part of his appeal, right? But here's the problem. Jake Paul is right over there, on the exact same platform, pulling the exact same shtick. He also wears his emotions on his sleeve. He also acts nice and friendly. He also talks about his issues, his beef with other YouTubers. And that's a huge issue because everyone and their cousin has started to say that Jake Paul is a big liar. That in his real life, he's rude and mean and opportunistic. Nothing like what he presents in his videos. We want Shane Dawson to be real. Shane Dawson is popular because you think he's real. But how can we know he's real when another guy is saying the exact same things and everyone's saying he's totally fake? Well, here's a solution. What if Jake Paul is a monster? Returning to the second episode for a moment, we can see how Shane and Katie's understanding of sociopathy is deeply related to questions of artificiality and authenticity. Unlike regular people, like the empath Shane Dawson,
So an empath. I've heard that before.
Yeah.
a sociopath is someone whose disorder has rendered them unknowable, and who can only act from a place of phoniness. If they're nice to their fans, that's because they're manipulating them. If they have a romantic relationship, they're doing that to keep up appearances. If it ever seems like they're showing compassion or vulnerability, that's because they want something from you.
They don't have emotions, so like they wouldn't
She
try.
went to the wall.
They might if they thought it made them fit in or like get what they want because they're deceitful.
And we can see this idea expressed very clearly in the first episode of the show, where Shane Dawson talks to fellow YouTuber iNabbers and says this.
And that's the sociopath question, because if he is genuinely a sociopath, like a lot of people think, then Jake Paul is a character, it's a mask, and like the real person none of us have seen, which is like one of the scariest things ever.
Here, the manner in which Jake Paul comes to represent the other isn't related to him doing bad things, but to the idea that his art may never reflect who he is when he takes off the mask. And yeah, it might be spooky to think about this kind of person, this figure of total inauthenticity, but as long as we have reason to believe that the vast majority of people aren't sociopaths, then I guess we can trust that in most cases, Shane's included, we can know an artist through their work. If the monster is fake, after all, everybody else is probably real. Part 3. Where is the monster? So, let me start this section with a little story. A kid wakes up from a nightmare, screaming because there might be a monster under his bed. And to be clear, from the kid's perspective, that theory actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, for one thing, when a room is dark, you don't really have access to a lot of sense data. You can't really see anything clearly, so there might very well be a monster hidden in the shadows somewhere. Just as important, the kid just woke up from a dream where the monster did exist. And who's to say that there is some firm separation between reality and dreams? If the monster existed before, then why can't he now? But then, of course, the dad comes in. And sure, he looks under the bed and checks in the closet, does the things the kid asks him to do. But he also tells the kid something. There is no monster in your room, and there won't ever be one. Go back to sleep. Now, maybe the kid doesn't believe him at first, but eventually he comes to the conclusion that his dad is right. He realizes that just because you can't see, that doesn't mean there's something in the dark. And just because you had a dream, that doesn't make it real. That's the thing about monsters, isn't it? When we realize they don't exist, the fears that created them are proven to be illogical. So, in the first half of this documentary, Shane Dawson is this child. He's plagued by all these scary questions, right? Why does society reward these douchebags who produce terrible work? How can we be sure that an artist is authentic? And, like the kid, he responds to these questions with the invocation of a monster. Sociopaths are why our meritocracy doesn't always work, and sociopaths are why some artists are fake, when others, like Shane, are real. It's sociopaths, monsters, Jake Paul. But in the second half of the documentary, this entire paradigm shifts. Shane transforms from being the kid waking up from a bad dream into being the father, telling his child that there is no monster under the
After a
bed.
while?
And that shift,
You say after a
monumental
while?
as it may seem, occurs in the blink of an eye. In the 6th episode of the series, after Shane and Katie spend a day just following around Jake and seeing what his normal life is like, they have this conversation.
So far, like,
Yeah.
I don't feel weird, I don't feel unsafe.
And just like he wasn't crazy with you in the car when you guys like drove off on that crazy ATV. I mean,
It was like fun, but it
No,
wasn't
he
safe.
was, he was safe.
So,
I don't know. And they have a dog to take care of, and that's a sweet dog.
And I like her. I like her. Like, she's cool.
she's super nice.
And just like he cares for her, and like the way he interacts is really sweet.
And that's that, right? Jake was pretty cool to Shane, made him feel comfortable. and they have a dog that they treat well, and that's a nice dog. And Jake seems to have an actual relationship with Erica Costel. He's nice to her. They hold hands. What's more, in this episode and the one before it, Shane talks about how Jake is actually a lot like him.
You did that too?
Yeah. I knew I had so many things in common with you, just this weird, like, gut feeling.
They're both ambitious boys from broken families who had to work hard to get where they are. Around 3 hours after meeting Jake Paul, the entire narrative established by the first half of the documentary comes crashing down. There exists no horrific other here. There is no monster. And what happens when we realize a monster doesn't exist? Well, I said it before. The concerns he embodied are revealed to be irrational. As it turns out, we don't have to be worried about this question of authorial authenticity. I mean, yeah, not everything Jake does in his videos is real. The pranks are, in fact, staged. But now we're told in no uncertain terms. This guy is, and can be, authentic on camera. He expresses real emotions about himself and his brother and his GF and his ex-GF. He's like Shane, right? And we know that Shane is an authentic YouTube presence, so Jake must be too. Or, as it turns out, we don't have to worry about who the system does and doesn't reward. Like, Jake Paul still produces garbage, and that is still a problem, but now that we know he's not a sociopath, the problem is understandable, non-threatening, always posed as a simple problem that can be rectified with a short explanation. Isn't it bad that 40% of the time in your videos is spent manipulating kids with ads that pretend to be real content? Oh, I mean, I don't think I'm manipulating kids. I mean, there's ads on SpongeBob, right? But I will think about that.
For people to say that I'm like trying to manipulate younger kids it's like...
Isn't it bad that you actively profited from making a video where you made largely unfounded criminal accusations against people? You know what? You're right. I just wasn't thinking, man. I'm gonna delete that video right now. Just solve the problem right here. Good, no problemo. So, okay. Maybe the best work isn't always rewarded, but everyone here is a good faith actor, dealing with hard stuff, trying their best to produce better things. In short, the system is in the process of working itself out. I guess I should be happy about all that, you know? I mean, for one thing, it would have just been plain out irresponsible to end this documentary with the notion that Jake Paul can really be diagnosed as a sociopath by this random dude. I'm genuinely happy that that didn't happen. But more than that, when your dad comes in and tells you that there's nothing to be afraid of, that's supposed to comfort you, right? All those fears about darkness and your dreams, that can all go away when he says that. That should make us happy. Part 4. The existential horror of Shane Dawson. What does Shane want out of this documentary? Like, as a character? Well, there's a few things we could say, but I would suggest this. Shane wants to find something to be afraid of. He wants to find and isolate a monster, show that he's not like the monster, and explain some of the problems we have with that monster. But looking at Jake Paul, Shane is offered no monster, no sociopath who harms the system and exploits us. So instead of finding something to be scared about, Shane just finds an absence, a dead end. If Jake Paul is not unusual or monstrous, there's just nothing left to say. But what if that's not true? What if those questions that Shane Dawson's work brought out for us were pretty darn reasonable and important? And more importantly, what if they're problems that just can't be explained with a sociopath? Like, here's an idea. What if the mechanism that produces Jake Paul's just isn't very good at generating quality work? And not in the sense that some people making bad choices are causing problems with it that are working themselves out, but in the sense that this weird stuff is exactly what YouTube is asking for. What if Jake Paul essentially does what's wanted from him, and he's rewarded as a result? Maybe that is something to be worried about. Or, here's an idea. What if we actually can't know if an author is being authentic? And not in the sense that certain creators make it hard to tell sincerity from phoniness, but in the sense that this entire notion of authenticity that's so important to us is a contrivance. What if it's being manufactured and sold to us by Jake Paul and Shane Dawson and YouTube? Maybe that is a reasonable thing to talk about and be concerned with. Shane Dawson's entire explanatory model in this film, the thing he uses to answer his questions, is founded in this narrative of dysfunctionality. The horrible entity who doesn't work right and who destroys good things and who we cannot relate to. But what Dawson cannot or does not want to understand is that this story, Jake Paul's story, was never one of dysfunctionality. And if Jake Paul can come to embody any horror, it is the horror of a system that's working according to plan. So, that's all I had to say about Shane Dawson and Jake Paul. I hope you enjoyed that because it took so long. I don't even know why it took so long, but it was by far the hardest thing I've ever written. So, now it's time for my Patreon question of the video. My favorite time of the week. My name is Philip asks, is your name actually Joel? And approximately, how big are you? So, I feel like I've answered this question before, but whatever. My name isn't actually Joel, it's Henry, and I'm approximately like 150 pounds and 5 feet 10 inches tall. I don't know if that was too specific to be approximate. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. It's Shane Dawson, Jake Paul if you were watching. I really do hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Nobody should have to pay for one-size-fits-all insurance coverage. Liberty Mutual customizes your car and home insurance so you only pay for what you need. Liberty, 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 liberty.
Hey everybody, so today we're going to be talking about a very special PragerU video. So every so often, PragerU does this sort of informal book club thing, where they get some of their conservative lackeys to go through famous books and talk about how great and conservative they are. And in one of these videos, Dave Rubin and a guy named Mike Knowles go through George Orwell's 1984 with the express purpose of trying to connect Big Brother's Oceania to modern America, claiming that today's society is particularly Orwellian.
What George Orwell is describing here, the reason it resonates with, not just now, perhaps at a particularly Orwellian moment, but it has resonated for so many years.
So this video is pretty much just hog wild. Basically, from minute 1 to minute done, it is a fever dream of strange, unhinged claims about George Orwell's 1984 and about modern America. It's also pretty interesting, and today I'm excited to talk about it. By the way, this is another one of my less scripted videos. I don't have a formal script this time, since you guys liked it when I did that last time with the School of Light video. If you don't like this format, then you only have yourselves to blame for liking it in the first place. And with that out of the way, let's get started. So we can get a basic idea for what this video is going to be from one line that occurs toward the middle.
Well, what's interesting about this is, I think when most people, maybe not my conservative friends, but when most people think of like the totalitarian, authoritarian state coming, they always think it's going to be a far-right state. Like the idea in 1984 is that the Ministry of Truth, like the whole apparatus, is somehow thought of as far-right, I think, is the idea. And yet, look what's happening in reality now. In reality now, it's this far-left thing that's seemingly bubbling up from the bottom.
Yeah.
So this is a super interesting line for me because it really gets at the basic problem that Dave Rubin and Mike Knowles are going to have as they step into this text. See, they want to talk about 1984. They want this famous cultural touchstone to be reflective of conservative ideology. But the fundamental issue is Orwell's book is about the impact of totalizing institutional violent power. And they can't really talk about that. They can't connect that to the real world. And that's because conservatives have that power. Conservatism, and more broadly speaking capitalism, is undeniably the most powerful force in America right now. And, you know, PragerU and Dave Rubin like those things. They like them a lot. Therefore, they have to depart from 1984's critique in a pretty major way here, even as they act like it's no big deal. The problem in Orwell's society is clearly centered around power and its misuse. But to Dave Rubin, the problem must be coming from the powerless. It must be coming from the bottom. And this strange ham-fisted reinterpretation of 1984 is basically what the entire video revolves around. It informs both what they choose to criticize and how they go about criticizing it. And with that, let's actually jump in. So most of the time in this video is spent just regurgitating the like 3 conservative culture war talking points that they always bring up. You know, they want to find a connection between doublethink in the world of 1984 and today's society, and so they decide that anti-racism is like doublethink.
People who say they're anti-racist are the ones who are acting in a racist way, and the way George Orwell describes it is he calls it doublethink. Mm-hmm. We have to get rid of America's terrible past, which had segregation, and the way we're going to do that is institute segregation.
It's contradictory to think both that racism exists and that our solutions to it might have to fall along racial lines. It's impossible to hold those two thoughts in your head at once. It's beyond reason! Or like trans people existing and wanting to be respected. That's a bit like Winston being brainwashed into thinking that 2 + 2 equals 5.
This ties into the insistence of the government. You have to believe that 2 + 2 equals 5, because if we all really believe that, then that will be true. And it seems to be the same thing when you call a he, when you call him her, you have really substantively changed who he is.
Yeah. And you know, that's a bit dumb, isn't it? Like, I don't want to overplay my hand here or whatever, but personally, I don't think that trans people are trying to brainwash us. Or, and this is one of my favorites, they claim that an NPR article that's advocating that we decolonize our bookshelves is essentially advocating for book burning.
The Nazis were literally burning books. What are we doing right now? We're not burning books yet, although NPR did put out that thing about how you have to decolonize your bookshelf, which in essence is a modern book burning. They're not going to write, oh, burn all your books, but they will say, get rid of bad books. 1984.
Which, you know what, I'll just give that one to Dave, I guess. NPR, when they were saying that you should read more diverse authors, was essentially advocating for book burning. I might disagree with Dave Rubin about a great many things, but that is a bulletproof argument. You know what, let's actually look up the author of that article really quickly. Juan Vidal wrote the article. Juan, you have a lot of explaining to do, mister. I can't believe that NPR would hire you, given your Nazi sympathies. Oh, Juan Vidal, you have a lot of explaining to do, mister. Oh, Juan Vidal. Oh, Juan. But okay, I know what you might be wondering right now. So we have the ideology of our Big Brother society down, right? Racism is bad, and trans people should be afforded basic respect and decency. That's Big Brother. But how is that ideology maintained? How is it forced on us? You know, somebody making a claim, even a contradictory or untrue claim, does not a dystopia make. Compliance with those claims needs to be mandatory. It needs to be forced on us. And so, because Dave Rubin can't look at institutional power, because the problems he's pointing to cannot come from the establishment, he's left in this video with the thinnest argument imaginable, that the basic coercive mechanism through which our dystopia functions is cancel culture, something they bring up multiple times.
When we watch people cancel each other on Twitter, we watch mobs and everything go after everybody, in a way they're trying to pretend they're pious. I'm so great, and if anyone else steps out of line and says something that I don't like, I don't believe, I'll destroy them because I'm so much better.
Now, to be clear, I'm not against every possible criticism of cancel culture. The word has such an amorphous definition. It's used by so many people that it would be kind of silly for me to say that nobody has a good criticism of it. That said, I think it's fair to say that if you just look at the raw issue of people getting canceled, it's just not as big a deal as conservatives are making it out to be. Most people, even most explicit racists or whatever, are not living in fear of getting canceled, are not standing under the boot of Twitter absolutely destroying them. It's just like not in the top 50 threats to the average person living in America right now. But more importantly here is the obvious point. If cancel culture, on its own, was able to produce an Orwellian dystopia, then why are conservatives always on their shit? It certainly seems like having money, having institutional support, having an audience makes cancellation literally impossible, implying here that one of these forces is more powerful than the other. Institutional power is stronger than Twitter cancel power. And if I'm wrong about that, then I guess I cancel Dave Rubin. He's canceled now. Dave Rubin is over. You're welcome, everybody. I've done it. You know, I think all of this leads to an important point about cancel culture that we often miss when we talk about it from the left. Because to us, cancel culture might speak negatively to the way that power works in our society. We might criticize corporations who profit off of our collective outrage. But to conservatives, canceling is more than that. It has this metaphysical, overpowering quality. And that's because it is the only thing they can talk about. Because it is the only power structure that at least has the veneer of not being institutional. It's something conservatives can look at and say, see, money is meaningless. Our power is meaningless. Just look at this PragerU video that rattles off 6 people who got canceled.
Cancellation involves social media mobs engaged in public shaming and the creation of blacklists. Virtually no one is immune. Not Kevin Hart, not J.K. Rowling, not Woodrow Wilson, not Drew Brees.
Woodrow Wilson, a literal dead president, was canceled just for loving the Ku Klux Klan. Need we say more? Cancel culture isn't just a thing to them. It's not just another problem. Rather, it is a bedrock justifying ideology for modern conservatism.
When people say they want to be politically correct, they want to make sure that people aren't offended. Now, you do that too long, and what are you left with? You're left with just nothing. You're left with an inability to do anything.
But, okay, let's put all this behind us and ask a question. A question that still really baffles me and that we haven't gotten an answer to. Why are they making this video? Like, I get that they hate cancel culture and seem to think of it as some primary animating force of reality. But this is only an explanation of an idea that has already been assumed here. That the world we live in is a bleak dystopia. A world that could be called particularly Orwellian. And why would they want to assume such a thing? I mean, capitalism in our society is pretty much allowed to function unabated Donald Trump, a pretty intense conservative in a lot of ways, is currently the president. Billionaires have enormous amounts of control over the way we live our lives and have an almost unprecedented amount of wealth compared to the average American. And these are the positions that PragerU advocates for, that Dave Rubin specifically has advocated for.
I think you do a flat tax. So basically, what I lay out in the book is pretty much everybody can pay 18%. But if you make under 50 grand, you get a free ride. I don't even think that's totally right, but I think that would be the way of helping the people.
And even if cancel culture and SJWs were truly the bane of society, you'd think that would be far outweighed by the fact that we live in a conservative capitalist renaissance. So, why do they hate it so much? Why do they call it dystopia? And I think the answer here is pretty dang simple, right? PragerU doesn't actually think that a conservative world is a good one. They know that their policies have not made society a better place, and more importantly, they are speaking to an audience of mostly working-class Americans who know that fact very, very well. I mean, they're living in it, right? They're living in the shit society. You can't really tell them it's good because they know that it's not. And you can really see this understanding come through in one moment toward the end of the video. The main reason I decided to make this.
So Winston meets these other people in the inner party. They give him the secret book. He reads the secret book, and it turns out it's a setup. Or if it's not a setup, it's still a setup. Because he's given the book by a member of the inner party that in this system, it even has its own opposition within it. There is no escape. Even that opposition might be a false hope or a safety valve on the utter oppression.
Well, I think this is what people would say is sort of like our political system now is like this sort of fake duopoly.
Yes.
Right? It's like this fake, we've got, you know, the Democrats or the liberals and the Republicans, the conservatives, whatever, and it's like it seemingly is that those are the only choices. And yes, as long as the system only allows those choices, well then those are the only choices. But are those really the only choices? You gotta believe this or you gotta believe this. I mean, no one really lives their life like that.
It seems like no matter who wins the election, no matter which party wins, certain things just keep on happening. We lose more and more of our freedoms, we rack up more and more of our debt, the culture keeps going more and more in one direction. It doesn't seem to matter who wins.
Holy shit, right? That's amazing. Because for one moment, these guys are actually interpreting 1984. They looked at a text about manufactured consent, about how even opposition to power can be assumed by power and against the people, and they said, shit, that's a bit like our society. Maybe there's a structure at the center of the state, at the center of power in general, that doesn't meaningfully represent what people want. Now, I'm not saying these guys are saying brilliant stuff in this moment. And I'm sure that whatever society they're talking about that would supposedly represent the will of the people would actually not do that. They are PragerU, after all. Dave Rubin is bad. But still, they are talking about 1984. They're not neutering the book here, making it about SJWs and cancel culture and NPR. No, they are using it as an opportunity to talk about power, the way it is distributed, and how it works. But of course, this can't last. I cut the clip short before, and I'll play the rest now.
It doesn't seem to matter who wins.
I dare make a pro-Trump comment. I don't know if I'm allowed.
Will certainly be censored by the Ministry of Truth on the internet.
Somebody's not going to be happy about this. But in many ways, when I was rereading it, I kept thinking, man, what they needed was a Trump.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because what was Trump, or what is Trump? He just sort of broke through all of this. If you're talking about how do you break the duopoly, how do you break the false choices, how do you break political correctness, all these things, who has been the greatest breaker of those things?
What a fitting and tragic end to this idea, right? That in the one moment where it looks like they're saying something of value, something attentive to the text, something that's kind of transgressive, it is revealed to be meaningless and vapid to them. Just like what happens in 1984, we can oppose power and we can criticize power, but only when we can do those things as a prop. Wait, shouts Dave Rubin nervously. All those things we said before are totally problems, but Donald Trump is fixing it. He's got it under control. Now, this moment, taken together, doesn't make any sense. Of course it doesn't. For one thing, how exactly does Dave Rubin think that Trump has solved any of the problems they brought up together? Did Donald Trump destroy the duopoly of American politics? Has he adequately represented the will of the American citizen? Fuck, has he lowered the national debt, as they're so obsessed with? No, he hasn't. He hasn't done any of those things. But also, you know, it just doesn't make any sense on the face of it, considering the other things they said in the video. Like, are we in a particularly Orwellian time?
George Orwell was describing here the reason it resonates with, not just now, perhaps at a particularly Orwellian moment.
If so, Donald Trump clearly hasn't fixed our dystopia. When they made this video, he had already been president for almost 4 years, and everything's still broken. They're still complaining about this. Clearly, he hasn't fixed the problem. So it doesn't make sense, but maybe it doesn't have to. Or rather, maybe the kind of sense I'm trying to apply to this video doesn't really work. It is, after all, the duty of the party to provide us two contradictory messages and ask us to not only accept them, but believe them. We must believe that the world is degenerate, decayed, broken down, the worst it's ever been, and we must believe that they're doing a great job running it. 10 out of 10 ruling class, perfecto. And if those two statements contradict each other in your mind, well, you just have to believe harder, I guess. So that's the end of the video! That's the end of the video. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, like, comment, subscribe. Donate to me on Patreon if you want to. There's an extended cut of this video on there that I decided was really bad. Like, the intro is like 8 minutes long, and it's really boring. And if you pay me money, you can see how boring it is, I guess. Enjoy that. And now it's time for my Patreon question of the video. Dr. Thembo69 asks, what is your favorite style of denim jeans? So I don't like the square cut jeans that just go straight down the leg. I like a little taper. I don't wear skinny jeans, but I like them to conform somewhat to the shape of my leg. And I don't like the way it looks when it just goes straight down. I think it makes me look like a I don't know, kind of childlike. It's hard for me to explain why I hate it so much. Okay, thanks so much for coming. Hope you liked the video. Bye.
Hello everyone. So, I have a little confession to make. I had an idea for a video while looking at Stefan Molyneux's The Truth About X series, in particular his videos about popular contemporary movies. Now, my idea was to watch all of those videos and make a sort of rapid-fire, reverse CinemaSin style debunking video where I point out all the time Stefan screwed up, or misremembered something, or misrepresented what was in the movie, and so on. So I sat down with my notebook and put the first one on, The Truth About Wonder Woman. Now, as I watched this video, I very quickly realised that my original idea was not going to pan out. You see, Stefan gets so many things wrong about just this one particular movie that any response seeking to address all of his movie videos would probably be several hours long. So I had to abandon my original plan and just concern myself with the truth about Wonder Woman today. I'm very sorry. And now the reason I started out by watching that video is because I was honestly looking forward to Stefan's take on the Wonder Woman movie. And that's because back in April, Stefan posted this tweet: "Pasta in tomato sauce, now with feminist virtue signalling." And there's a photograph of a can of pasta in tomato sauce with some female superheroes on it, Wonder Woman included. And I like this tweet a lot for a few reasons, and let me briefly run them by you. Firstly, I like the idea that a can of pasta is apparently feminist because it has a picture of a cartoon lady on it. Likewise, this is apparently virtue signalling, although as to what virtues are being signalled here, who knows? The can just has a picture of Supergirl on it, that's it. Unless no artificial flavours or preservatives is virtue signalling now. I'm at a loss there. The next thing I like about this tweet is that Stefan appears to have purchased the can of pasta and tomato sauce in order to complain about it, which would be funny enough by itself, to be honest. But as people were quick to point out to Stefan, the cans also had versions with male superheroes on, such as Superman and Batman. Apparently the existence of male superheroes on cans of pasta doesn't qualify as virtue signalling for whatever reason. This is Molyneux's projecting problem that I've spoken about in a previous video. Any depiction of a woman, even a completely neutrally presented cartoon of a fictional woman in a meaningless context, on a can of pasta even, is apparently malicious feminist virtue signalling now, as if the mere fact that Supergirl or Wonder Woman exist at all is somehow a problem. So anyway, after seeing Stefan's take on a can of pasta with Wonder Woman on it, how could I not be excited for his video review of the Wonder Woman movie that came out this year? We know how much Stefan likes seeing women fight against men in movies, and this movie has the all-female warrior race, the Amazons, in it, so you know we're in for a good time. So let's get to it, and we're going to go about this semi-chronologically here. We'll work through Stefan's video from start to finish with some skipping around as needed, and it should go without saying here, there will be spoilers from this point on, so beware. And let's begin.
So the artistry, charm and special effects, and one powerful twist are the only things that rescue Wonder Woman from its own stultifying cliches. First of all, I give you the cliches. 1. A female-run society is a paradise.
Now, there's a very good reason for this. You see, the island the Amazons live on is a paradise. A literal God-given paradise.
With his dying breath, Zeus created this island to hide us from the outside world, somewhere Ares could not find us.
We give thanks to the gods for giving us this paradise.
It's not a paradise because women live on it. It's a paradise because Zeus, a male god by the way, created it to be that way.
During the first scenes on the island of